want to introduce our speakers tonight. Jennifer Tyler is CCL's Vice President of Government Affairs. She has years of experience on Capitol Hill and leads CCL's legislative strategy and engagement with members of Congress. She ensures that our policy work is timely, impactful, and aligned with the changing political landscape, which is exactly what she will tell us tonight. And we also have Dana Nuccitelli, who is CCL's research manager. Dana is a well-known climate science communicator and environmental scientist who translates complex scientific findings into accessible, actionable insights for volunteers and policymakers. And Dana plays a key role in grounding CCL's policy work in the latest research and evidence, and he is also an excellent chart creator. If we are successful in our work tonight, you will have achieved these 3 learning goals: to learn about our primary asks for our July 22nd Lobby Day. You'll learn about our secondary asks and also have a better understanding of why we have chosen those asks and the data that supports them. And with that,
Mindy, may I interrupt you quickly?
yes?
I was following the link Ali Sparks gave a couple of days ago, and there are a couple of people, and I don't know quite which post or which
On a different
video
Zoom
we are
line.
supposed to watch here.
So they're on a different Zoom line.
Yes, there is a letter from Ellie Sparks. She had gave a link there, and a couple of people followed that link.
All right, Zig, we'll try and figure out what that is and see if we can go rescue them. But if not, at least we are recording. So appreciate that input.
You're welcome.
And with that, I will turn it over to Jen.
All right. Well, thanks, Mindy. And thanks, Zig, for that helpful note. I want to thank all of you for joining us. I think we're close to 300 strong now, which is awesome. I am super excited for the Lobby Day. There's so much going on, but I really can't wait to hit the hill with you guys. I think we'll talk more about why, but I think it's a really important time with everything happening. So we've got a lot of content tonight. I might go a little bit quick, but I'm glad there's a recording. We've got lots of notes, and we'll have a chance to talk next week as well if there's more questions. So with that, I'll get right into it. So where things stand, we've been talking a lot about the reconciliation bill. We were lobbying on that since early this year, focusing on those clean energy tax credits that were a part of the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. And Republicans ultimately did end up passing and signing into law that reconciliation bill right on July 4th was when it was signed into law. It was passed earlier that week by the Senate and then by the House again for the second time. That bill did include the rollbacks and weakening of most of those clean energy tax credits, especially there was a significant hit to the wind and solar tax credits. And many of you might have read the weekly briefing. Our VP of Comms had a really good piece there. So if you want a little bit more info, that's a good place to turn for now, but we'll dive into it more and definitely at the conference. But it is definitely a setback. You know, the bill was not the outcome we wanted to see. Obviously, we want to preserve all of those clean energy tax credits, and the fact that any of them were weakened is a significant defeat. I think truly for the momentum on clean energy, but also on climate. So I don't want to, invalidate kind of how disappointing that is, especially with all the work we put into it. That being said, the other piece of this is the initial House proposed reconciliation bill was much worse than the final outcome. So we saw that initial House reconciliation bill, and we went overdrive into lobbying the Senate, lobbying the House as well, and really pushed them to improve that bill. And ultimately, the final bill, although it wasn't obviously not a good bill, still did roll back those some of those tax credits and weaken them. It was much better than that initial version. It did preserve those tax credits way more than the first version, and ultimately about 25% less costly to both consumers and ratepayers, but also to the climate. So, it's a mixed bag there. Obviously, it's not the bill we wanted to see pass and get across the finish line, but it was definitely a better outcome because of our advocacy than if we hadn't been there advocating and really playing on the field that day. So that's where things stand now. I know with that, we've been working on this for months and months. So it's kind of, well, what now? Why are we on the Hill now? What influence are we going to be able to have now? I think this is a really key moment. And when I was on the Hill, I worked for a moderate Republican, and we took a lot of really hard votes. There was no vote, almost no vote. That was an easy vote for us. We were going to have people mad at us on almost every single vote. And we took a lot of very contentious votes like this one. We voted on the first Trump tax package in the first Trump administration. We voted on farm bills. We voted on the Trump impeachment vote a couple times. And after each of those votes, you'd have this big buildup to the vote where you're tallying the calls, you're figuring out who's reaching out, you're listening to constituents. And then afterwards, there's kind of this moment where the office is waiting to see, okay, what's the blowback here? Did people pay attention? Was it just really groups getting people up in arms in advance of the vote? Or is this really resonating with our constituents? Are they paying attention? This is that moment. We want offices to see that this vote is not the end. One, it's not the end of the conversation on clean energy tax credits. We're going to be lobbying on that, and I'll talk more about that. But it's also not the end of this broader conversation that we're having on climate. And without constituents hitting the Hill, making their voices heard like you all, it's very easy for an office to assume that voters really don't care. They're not paying attention to this. It wasn't that relevant. It was just special interests kind of getting, phone calls up to the Hill, or that special interests really hold a lot more sway than constituents do, than voters do, and that political forces are much more impactful than constituent voices are. And we need to push back on that. We need to make it clear to members of Congress that constituents are paying attention. We are watching. We are paying attention. We have an opinion, and we're going to keep voicing that opinion and pushing them to move forward. But we're not just there to wag our finger at them and, tell them they did a bad job, because that's not going to get us anywhere. We're there with solutions. We'll go into all of our asks, but this lobby day is about, one, making sure we're not just letting this conversation drop about the clean energy tax credits, letting this big moment just kind of pass us by without any sort of response from us. We're going to take heed of this moment, let them know what we think, and then we're going to move forward. We're going to say, okay, with that, here's what we'd like you to do. And we'll go through all of those asks. And lastly, I know I've mentioned this before, but this is really a long game for us. Although this was a huge vote and a very important moment, and we obviously had a huge vote and a very important moment with the Inflation Reduction Act, advocacy really is about these long-term relationships and building the foundation that you can build on, and over time move things forward with a specific office or a conference or an entire Congress or the American people. And so even in those tough moments when you're losing on these shorter term battles, there's this long game that we have to remember about the value of these relationships. And so if we're showing up, it tells these offices that we're credible, we're consistent, we're going to keep partnering with them, we're going to keep raising our voices, and we're going to keep trying to shape what comes next. We're not going to back off because things didn't go our way. We're not going to back off because one party's in power over another. We're going to keep showing up time and time again, building these foundations so in the long run we can move things forward. So with that, let's dive into these asks. Let's dive into that forward thinking, what we're going to ask them. It's a little bit different this year. I know in previous years we've done maybe one or two kind of primary asks and then another separate secondary ask, and things are pretty kind of siloed on different issues. And one of the things as we were putting together these asks, and we start with kind of what's the most strategic thing we can talk about right now? What is the policy that we think, one, is most important from a climate perspective, two, stands a chance of movement? We don't want to necessarily advocate for something that really has absolutely no chance of going anywhere anytime. And three, it needs the grassroots voice. It needs that constituent voice to really move. So those are some of the criteria we look at. And as we started picking these things out, we picked out permitting reform, we picked out some of the cuts that the Trump administration is proposing to the Department of Energy, and we picked out, obviously, these clean energy tax credits that were just rolled back. As we picked those out, there was this theme standing out to us of clean energy. And that's something, obviously, Congress has been grappling with for some time in this reconciliation debate. And it really made a lot more sense to have this kind of top line ask that we're approaching offices with, which is support the clean energy transition. And then within that, we've got different specific policies we'd like them to pursue. So top line ask for all offices for this lobby day, that means House, Senate, Democrats, Republicans, is support the clean energy transition. Now, how we say that to each conference, to Republicans and Democrats, is slightly different. You'll see on this slide, Republicans, we want to highlight supporting the clean energy transition for affordable and reliable power. Those are things Republicans keep coming back to. How do we keep energy prices low, or they're scared of making them high? And how do we keep power reliable? How do we keep the lights on? Democrats, on the other hand, are more concerned about the climate. So we want to say advance clean energy for a safer climate. They're also concerned about keeping prices low and worried about making any energy prices go high. So safer climate, affordable power for Democrats. Within that, for each Republicans and Democrats, we have these, as I mentioned, specific policies we want to dive into, and we'll go into each of these individually. On the Republican side, we're going to talk about those key clean energy programs. That's the Department of Energy funding that President Trump has submitted to Congress he'd like to slash. We also are going to talk about those clean energy tax credits and the implementation. That's addressing that reconciliation bill and the rollbacks. And then lastly, permitting reform. For Democrats, we're going to talk about permitting reform, and we're going to talk about those key clean energy programs, the Department of Energy funding that we'd like to preserve. So why this kind of one overarching message? I just want to dive into this because I know some of you might ask, well, why are we doing this a little different? And you'll see the leave behinds. We'll have those up in the next day or so, and it's going to look a little bit different of what it's going to look like. But I really think it's a helpful, positive shift in that this is going to tell a much more cohesive story. Members of Congress, their staff, they're hearing asks every single day, dozens and dozens of asks. So if we have a unified message that really helps have all of our priorities stand out, we tie them together in a really nice message and story, it's going to really help that be incredibly clear to the office. So instead of jumping back and forth from different topics, it's all kind of tied up nicely in this one cohesive message, this one overarching message that's really clear based on the values that these members care about, and will resonate. It's also really grounded in current events. As I said, clean energy is something that is top of mind for folks. Clean, affordable, reliable energy. Republicans have been grappling with it this entire Congress as they talk about this reconciliation bill. And so we're responding directly to that conversation. We're injecting our voice, our concerns, our policy priorities directly into the conversation that's happening right now in Congress. It also, I think, is going to make some of our meetings a little more focused. Not that you guys don't have focused meetings already, but it can be challenging, I think, in the meetings I've been in when we're kind of going back and forth between all these different topics. It can kind of be hard to pinpoint exactly what the focus is. We have to keep reframing. This prevents that. We're not going to have to reframe things. You have one framework. You've got one big message that you can focus on, and you're tying things back to that, building out one big story that you're just reinforcing with each of these policy asks. And lastly, I mentioned this before, but we're solution oriented. We're focusing on what's the next step. We're going to respond to this vote, but we're not just going to sit there and be disappointed in folks for that vote or express our frustration with Democratic offices. We're really going to push things forward. What comes next? All right, so let's dive in. For Republicans, that overarching message, as I mentioned, support the clean energy transition for affordable and reliable power. Those are those two pieces. We want to really urge Congress to support some specific, targeted, pragmatic policies that are going to enable clean energy to compete, to scale, and to deliver dependable power to Americans. So that's kind of that overarching line that you can use in pretty much any Republican office that will really resonate with them. And again, the three asks for Republicans beneath that are funding the key clean energy programs, advancing permitting reform, and fixing that clean energy tax credit implementation. So diving into those key clean energy programs, this is a newer ask for us. We've engaged a little bit on appropriations before, but not quite at this level on a conference on our annual lobby day. Appropriations is the process that Congress goes through to allocate funding for federal agencies and programs. They do it every single year. That's when you'll hear about the threat of the government shutdown, because maybe Congress hasn't funded the government, which happens quite often these days. So that's the process they have to go through to fund the government. Well, part of that process is President Trump submitting, any president submitting their budget to Congress. President Trump's budget included some really significant cuts all across the board, but the climate cuts were really, really devastating. Those cuts are just proposed cuts. Congress ultimately is the one who's in control of funding. Congress is the one who decides how much funding goes where. And so we really want to let Congress know we need you to reject these cuts. We need you to stand your ground, assert your authority in this lane. This is entirely in Congress's purview to handle this. And we really want them to reject these cuts and fully fund these critical programs. And the two things I think is helpful to focus on for Republican messaging is energy innovation and reliability. And I just want to flag that for now, we're just focusing on clean energy. We are going to do a more comprehensive ask on NOAA funding later this summer, but for the sake of this lobby day, we're focusing on clean energy. This is a sample message triangle. I threw a few of these in this just so folks can kind of see. I'm going to run through these really fast. It's just a sample. So these kind of work where you've got your core ask in the center to fund clean energy programs, and then you pick 3 supporting messages that you think will resonate with your member. These are 3 that I think stand out for a lot of members, but can differ depending what you think might resonate with your specific one. Strengthen U.S. energy leadership and competitiveness, ensure the grid can meet rising demand, and reduce costs for taxpayers and ratepayers. Again, you can substitute out different messages depending who your member is, and you'll have time to plan your lobby meeting accordingly. So these are the 2 programs we're going to highlight that had faced really significant cuts in the president's budget. The first is the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. That proposed cut was a 74% cut. What the Office of Energy and Efficiency and Renewable Energy does is it really funds that early stage research and development activities to develop efficient energy, different types of energy sources. That's really, really important for our global energy leadership. So it's important to help us develop these new technologies, more efficient sources of energy, and compete on that global stage. Zeroing out a lot of the programs within this, such as solar, wind, hydrogen, is going to really, really slow down the development of a lot of these really important technologies. Not only is that going to harm our ability to compete on an international stage, but ultimately it would raise energy rates for American consumers. Because even if we're thinking R&D is kind of a longer term process, it all plays into what everyday Americans are paying for their home, for their energy sources. So that's the first one. The second one is ARPA-E, the Advanced Research Project Agency, and the E stands for energy. And that's a proposed cut of 57% by the administration. ARPA-E is incredibly bipartisan, extremely, extremely well supported in Congress, and it develops cutting edge energy technologies that keep us ahead of our global competitors while driving down those costs. You'll notice some of that same messaging, and the point of that messaging is that's what resonates with Republicans. But ARPA-E is a research project, so it researches, it invests in some of these really critical, high-impact technologies that maybe the private sector isn't able to invest in yet because it's too risky. But ultimately, that federal support pushes it forward. Without that, again, the private sector is not quite ready to invest in some of these things, and so it would really slow down progress and prevent us from being more competitive on that international stage. So those are the 2 programs we want to highlight. Diving into our next ask for Republicans, it's going to focus on those clean energy tax credits that we talked about that were rolled back in the reconciliation bill. This first paragraph is really kind of the overarching line that I want people to read pretty closely and stick to as much as we can. We do want to talk about our disappointment with the bill, with the vote and the passage of the bill, but we want to be very careful. We don't want to come in and demonize the office. We don't want to be overly aggressive. We still want to frame ourselves as an incredibly respectful organization that values the time we're given by the office and wants to have a constructive conversation with them. So I think it's fair to say we can let officers know the budget bill went too far in cutting clean energy tax credits that have played a really critical role in lowering energy costs, helping to meet growing electricity demand, and spurring domestic manufacturing and job creation. So we're letting them know right off the bat, we don't agree with this bill. It went way too far. And then I underlined some of those specific phrases because those are the messages that you can kind of pick out and figure out which of those messages resonate with my member. Is my member concerned most about energy costs? Are they worried about the future of electricity and how much power we need? Are they worried about job creation? Are we in an area that's lost a lot of jobs and really needs that resurgence? What message really resonates? And then we could talk, the most important, we could talk about the most important tax credits that were hit, which were the low cost solar and wind development tax credits. And also the homeowner efficiency tax credits were hit as well. So we can highlight those specific ones as things we really were concerned about. But overall, we can let them know it went way too far and we're really disappointed with the final outcome. And then pivoting forward, our ask on that, we don't want to just stay on what we're disappointed with. We want to ask that they reject any guidance that further restricts these clean energy tax credits, and they consider implementing additional policies that might ease the phase out of the tax credits, reduce uncertainty, and provide the market with the stability needed to, and these are some of those similar messages, to keep energy affordable and dependable for American families and businesses. So the first ask here, rejecting any guidance that further restricts those clean energy tax credits, that's in response to a recent executive order that the administration put out that signifies that they would like to tighten these credits on solar and wind even further and potentially restrict them even further. So we want Congress to reject that. If the IRS, if the administration puts out any guidance on the implementation of these tax credits, which they have to do, they have to put out guidance, but if that guidance tightens them even further, we really need Congress to assert themselves and push back on that. That's the first part. And the second part is as they work on implementing, there are going to be opportunities for tweaks to this around the edges, probably nothing significant, but we want to make sure that Republicans are looking at those opportunities, and they're probably going to be quiet about it, but looking at those opportunities to see, can we ease the phase out? Can we slow it down a little bit? Can we change this part of the policy to make it a little more clear for businesses so they can apply for these credits? Different tweaks like that. So that's the second part of that ask. Here's a sample message triangle on that. Again, we want to reject those further cuts, ease the phase out of credits. That's our central ask. Some of those specific supporting messages, lowering energy costs. These tax credits really help lower energy costs for consumers. These tax credits also really help us meet growing electricity demand, and Dana will get into the data behind that. And lastly, the tax credits have really spurred a lot of domestic manufacturing and job creation that without the credits will not be there. All right, now I'll turn it to Dana for some of that data.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So we've got some good data, especially from the Princeton group, Jesse Jenkins group, on the impacts of the rollback of the tax credits. So here we're looking at the energy demand in the United States since 2010 and projected forward through 2035. You can see there's a range there in those dashed lines because there's a lot of uncertainty about just how fast, for example, data centers, artificial intelligence, electrification are going to increase our demand, but we know it's going to increase fast. The question is just how fast. So it'll be somewhere in that range, rising very fast. So after the Inflation Reduction Act was passed with those clean energy tax credits, you can see our projected supply of electricity.
We can't see the slides. I can't anyway. Are you sure it's on?
Slide should be on.
I can see it.
I can see.
Okay.
I see it.
Okay, so hopefully most people can see it. You can see the projections of our supply in the blue here before the new bill was passed, doing quite well in terms of meeting the forecasted energy demand. And then we've got our new forecast of energy supply post big budget bill in the red here. And now you can see it's at the very low end of the potential range of demand. So really in a dangerous spot where only in the best case scenario where demand doesn't grow too much are we maybe going to have enough supply to meet our demand, which basically increases our risks of things like energy insecurity, power outages quite a bit going forward. And then here you can see that mix of where our power supply is coming from on the left before the bill, on the right after the bill. So after the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, we had lots and lots of solar and wind, especially ready to come online by 2035. This is showing 2035 supply. On the right, you can see the amount of solar and wind projected in 2035 is now much lower. The overall supply, as we saw on the last chart, is much lower. We will have an increase in fossil fuels, in gas and coal. We'll come back to this chart and talk about where that gas is going to come from. But the issue here is that it's going to create energy scarcity, reduce energy security, and also these are more expensive sources of electricity, and so it's going to increase our electricity prices and our electricity bills. So those are kind of the key points to highlight when talking to our Republican offices about the impacts of this bill. And you can see here projections of average household energy costs. This includes both electricity and also transportation, because we're going to now have fewer electric vehicles as well, which means more people driving gas cars, burning more gasoline, making gasoline prices go up more. And so under the Inflation Reduction Act, we expected household energy prices to decline over time, a total of about $600 over the next decade in total, due to lower electricity prices and also more people having electric cars and reducing gasoline demand. Whereas you can see the new projections for household energy costs in the red here, post big budget bill, electricity prices going up, more people using gasoline prices going up, so vehicle fueling prices go up. So the difference here is about $2,000 increased household energy costs over the next decade, thanks to these provisions in the bill. So it's another important thing to highlight, is that, you know, if we can take some actions to ease these phase outs, that will also reduce these increased energy costs.
Perfect. Thanks, Dana. That was great. And I want to highlight when you're going through the data, which is so helpful, and that will all of Dana's data. I like saying that, Dana, data. All of Dana's data will be in our leave behinds. So you'll have these charts to go off of, and you'll be able to reference them. But I want to highlight what I mentioned at the beginning, the important part of this lobby day. Yes, we want to get our asks out there, but we want to show up as constituents. We want to let these members know that folks from their community, folks who are going to be voting in the next election, folks who are, their neighbors, have kids going to their same school as their kids, really care and are paying attention and have issues that matter to them. So when you're talking about some of this data on energy prices, try to relate it to you. If there's things that stick out that not only you think are going to resonate with a member, but resonate with you, lean into that personal connection and how you can make that super relevant, or maybe it's relevant to someone in your family. But that really, I think, is going to help these conversations and drive home just how important these issues are. All right. So the last part of the clean energy ask for Republicans is going to be permitting reform, which you guys are pretty much experts in now, but we'll still go over it a bit. Overarching message: permitting bottlenecks are holding back American energy. So Republicans obviously wanting to, one of the phrases is unleash American energy. So permitting bottlenecks are really constraining that. We obviously care about the clean energy part of that, but they're going to care about the bottlenecks holding back energy overall. Our ask is for Congress to resume bipartisan talks on permitting reform and move forward. We'd like them to start with the Energy Permitting Reform Act. That was EPRA that we lobbied on last Congress. It was nearly across the finish line, but ultimately didn't get there. And so we don't want them starting from scratch. We think there's a really good product they can start there with. And a message that I think really kind of resonates, again, hitting on these same themes that you can keep tying back into. If we want to deliver affordable and reliable energy to American households, we've got to learn how to build again. We've got to do permitting reform so we can get these projects done. We do want to highlight for Republicans an issue in permitting reform that they're not as comfortable with, and that's transmission. We want to, Republicans are pretty favorable overall to permitting reform. The transmission piece is a tough one for them because it has to do with how many, which states are going to pay depending on where the transmission line runs through. What is that math for what each state pays, who's responsible for what, and it's a sticky issue. But we want to highlight how important it is that expanding transmission is included in the bill. If we don't include transmission reform, energy demand is not going to be met. Prices are going to skyrocket. And so we really have to double or even triple our transmission capacity in order to meet our future energy needs. In order to do that, we have to do permitting reform. And then our caveat to permitting reform that we highlight to Republicans and to Democrats, but Republicans especially, is that it has to be done responsibly. We don't just want any sort of permitting reform. We want to streamline project approvals, but only if we're preserving community input and ideally enhancing community input, and we're upholding the integrity of our core environmental protections. So that's an important piece there. A sample message triangle. Advancing smart permitting reform is that ask. A few messages that might resonate with your Republican member is it would support American energy independence by getting more energy out there on the grid. It would increase grid reliability by having more inputs to the grid, by modernizing our grid. All of that is going to make it more reliable, less blackouts, and reducing energy costs. Getting more energy on the grid, ideally clean energy, is going to make for cheaper energy for ratepayers and taxpayers. All right, now turning to Democratic members of Congress. That top line message is going to be advancing clean energy for a safer climate and affordable power. So again, we're still hitting that affordability message because that's resonating with both conferences. But for Democrats, we can also talk about the climate message and lean into that more because they're concerned about that. We want to focus that right now, more than ever, we have to accelerate clean energy development and deployment by addressing the remaining barriers. So we'll get into this, but there's hesitation now after this reconciliation bill, the rollback of these credits. There's hesitation on should we even do anything on clean energy tax credit or on clean energy because of the tax credit rollbacks? Is clean energy even going to go forward at all? And our message is we have to do it now. Now it's even more critical to address any of the remaining barriers to clean energy development and deployment. And the ways we need to do that, we need to advance permitting reform. We need to fully fund federal programs that help scale clean energy, lower costs, and support long-term reliability. Again, 3 messages that you can pick out for your specific member. And we'll dive into permitting reform first. So that first piece is really critical. As I mentioned, we're hearing from some Democratic members on the Hill that they are becoming more hesitant to touch permitting reform, to touch a lot of policies that deal with clean energy. Their concern with permitting reform is that now that these clean energy tax credits have been rolled back, we are seeing clean energy projects canceled, paused, pulled back on. And with that, there's a concern amongst Democratic members that if we did permitting reform, it would more significantly benefit fossil fuel projects than clean energy projects, or maybe only benefit fossil fuel projects than clean energy projects. We really want to push back on that. The data shows that's not true. It's very clear that even with these rollbacks of these tax credits, the vast majority of new power generation added to the grid is going to be clean. So any permitting reform we do is still going to disproportionately impact and benefit clean energy projects. And we really have to speed up this process to expand and modernize our transmission system in order to meet our climate goals. So while there's this major setback in the rollback of these tax credits, right now we have to figure out, okay, if these sources of clean energy no longer have this financial incentive, what are the other barriers we can reduce for them? And the biggest one is permitting reform. We have to address permitting. And again, these messages that are resonating with Democrats is that permitting reform is going to help us ensure that clean energy can scale quickly so we can meet demand, we can lower those costs, and we can reduce emissions. We also do want to highlight for Democrats the transmission piece. Now, not for the same reason as we want to highlight it for Republicans. Republicans are hesitant on transmission. Democrats are extremely in favor of transmission reform and build out. We want to highlight how important it is we do transmission reform, that we're fully supportive of it as a way to continue to push them to come back to the table. They want transmission reform, and transmission reform is not going to come, transmission build out's not going to come without permitting reform. We have to build that energy infrastructure faster in order to meet our emissions goals, to meet our climate ambition. And in order to do that, we have to have permitting reform. So we want to kind of tie those all together. This is what you want. You want transmission build out for climate. The only way to do that is with permitting reform. Here's why that's so critical to do right now. And the specifics on that, we also want to let Democrats know permitting reform can start from the Energy Permitting Reform Act. That's that EPRA bill. And the specific provisions that we think are worth highlighting for Democrats, and this is where it might be a little stickier when we talk to them, we want to push them on some things. We supported EPRA, the Energy Permitting Reform Act, and that bill included streamlining permitting authority for interstate transmission lines, preserving state involvement. So that's a piece they're going to like. This next two pieces, they're going to be a little uncomfortable with, but we want to put it out there because we want them to know this has to be a part of that solution. It needs to establish key categorical exclusions for low impact projects, and it has to have a reasonable statute of limitations for lawsuits. And lastly, the last piece, which we fully support and Democratic offices will appreciate, is that it increases early community input and preserves the integrity of our bedrock environmental laws. So when you go through permitting reform, these are the provisions you can highlight that we would like to see in a permitting reform package. Sample message triangle. The core message here, advanced smart permitting reform. Some of the messages that are resonating with Democratic offices, again, you can tweak these and you can lean into one more than another, but helps meet energy demand, reduces emissions, reduces energy costs. You want to really figure out what message triangle works for your member. We'll have a lot of training on that at the conference and we can talk more next week, but this is just one sample. So don't stick to this, really figure out what works for your member. All right, and Dana's got more data.
Always more data. So this chart, we're just kind of illustrating the fact that our build out of electrical transmission lines, and especially high capacity ones, has really slowed down over the past decade compared to what was happening in the past. And so we are capable of building electrical transmission lines faster, which is what we need to do to connect more clean energy to the grid. But we have to get the slow permitting process out of the way. And then I wanted to touch on the evidence why we're confident that permitting reform is still going to benefit clean energy the most, despite the rollback of the clean electricity tax credits. So we're going to go back to that modeling by Jesse Jenkins' team at Princeton. And I think the concern that some people are feeling is that, on the right here, this new environment that we're going to see more fossil fuels. We're going to see more gas and more coal in 2035 than we would have before the budget bill was passed. So that is a concern. However, that's not coming from new power plants. That's basically coming from less retirements of existing power plants and also more utilization of existing power plants. So we're basically going to have the infrastructure that is already in place, and we're going to utilize it more because there's going to be less wind and solar to displace that use of that fuel. Because we're using more of those fuels, the price of the fuel is going to go up. Electricity is going to be more expensive. But this isn't happening because of new power plant deployments. And you can see this on this other chart from the Princeton reports analyzing the impacts of the budget bill. So on the right side here, this is the expected new power generation build-outs before the big budget bill was passed. And on the left is the expected build-out after the big budget bill was passed. So again, you can see we're going to be building less wind and less solar. But what you don't see is building more of this gray of these gas power plants. That's because we have right now this issue that new gas-fired turbines are back-ordered. There's this big backlog of orders, and we're not going to be able to see any deliveries of new gas turbines before basically the 2030s. And so in the interim, if we're going to build anything, what we're going to build is going to be solar, batteries, and wind. And there's going to be less of that built, but the less permitting is an issue, the more of that will get built. And so what's holding back those gas turbines, that increased gas production, it's not permitting. It is the fact that there just aren't any gas turbines available. Whereas for clean energy, what's holding solar and wind back is going to be the rollback of the clean electricity tax credits, and also it's going to be the slow permitting process, especially because they're trying to get online as fast as possible so they can take advantage of that really short runway that's left for the tax credits. And so really expediting the permitting process is still going to benefit clean energy the most. And back to you, Jen.
Perfect. All right. So the second part of the ask for Democrats is the same as it was for Republicans. It's the fund the key clean energy programs. I won't go through those again, but those are those same Department of Energy programs, the Office of Energy Efficiency, as well as the ARPA-E, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. So we want to ask them to preserve funding push against President Trump's proposed budget cuts to Department of Energy clean energy programs. So you can refer back to that part for the Democrats. Moving right into our secondary asks. So on the Democratic side in the House and all of the Senate, we're going to be focusing on the Fix Our Forest Act. And then an optional House and Senate Republican office ask will be the foreign pollution tariff legislation, to look at foreign pollution tariff legislation. So we'll dive into each of those. On Fix Our Forests, what does the bill do? The House passed the Fix Our Forest bill, a version of it, in January of this year. It restores forest health, increases resiliency to catastrophic wildfires, and builds fire-safe defenses for communities in high-risk areas. I'm going to kind of run through this stuff pretty quick. That's because Dana and I have done a bunch of trainings on this, as well as some of our action teams have been really helpful in educating folks. So there's a lot of good resources out there on this. If you want to dive into Fix Our Forests, we've got a ton out there. Good Q&A doc that Dana's really perfected. That's super helpful. So the House passed a version earlier this year. Then there was a Senate version introduced. So we did a bit of lobbying on it at our conservative lobby day. We were pleased to see a bipartisan bill introduced in the Senate. Senators Curtis, Hickenlooper, Sheehy, Padilla introduced one. It included some really good improvements, some additional programming like a wildfire intelligence center, additional tribal authority to initiate forest resilience projects. And then it also included some other significant tweaks to the House bill that made folks feel more comfortable, including removing the requirement that groups comment during the comment period in order to challenge a project in court. And it maintained that early public project input, which was really critical. After the Senate version was introduced, it did have a legislative hearing in the Senate. So the next step for Democratic representatives is going to be, for all senators, the next step is going to be to ask them to vote in favor when it comes to the floor. So it will go to a markup on the Senate Ag Committee and then to the floor. So for all senators, our secondary ask will be, please vote in favor of the Fix Our Forest Act when it comes to the Senate floor. For Democratic representatives in the House who had a tougher time supporting this bill because of some of those provisions that I mentioned were tweaked in the Senate bill, they were hesitant to support. It did still pass with a bipartisan margin in the House, but we need more Democratic support, ideally, when the bill comes back from the Senate. So we want to lean on those Democratic members of the House and really tell them, once this bill comes back from the Senate, where it has these positive improvements in it, we'd like you to reconsider it and vote in favor of it. And if they already voted in favor, we'd like to say, please keep your vote in favor, because there's likely to be additional blowback and pushback on this bill should it pass the Senate and come back. So we really want to applaud the Democratic members of the House who did vote for it and urge them to continue to support when it returns. And as I mentioned, that optional secondary ask for Republicans is to look into foreign pollution tariff legislation. And that is another word for CBAM, a carbon border adjustment mechanism. That's a language that really is resonating more with Republicans right now. So we call them foreign pollution tariffs. But American-made products are 40% less carbon intensive than the global average. Currently, US imports 75% of goods from less carbon efficient countries. So we want to highlight that disparity, that we are cleaner, but we are importing a lot of goods from countries who are not as clean. We really need to right that. We need to right that issue, that discrepancy, and make sure that our companies, American companies who are cleaner, can compete on the international stage. So a foreign pollution tariff would allow our industries to leverage their carbon advantage, leverage the fact that they're cleaner and cleaner manufacturing to outcompete dirtier competition like China. And the Foreign Pollution Fee Act, which is a bill from Senator Cassidy, is a great example of a carbon tariff bill. And we've got a training all on that you can tune into. This is an amazing chart that Dana put together. You guys can look at, but it just shows the breakdown of the different asks, because I know there's a lot of things flying around. It gets a little confusing. But overall, I want folks to remember our overarching message here for House, Senate, Republicans, Democrats is to support the clean energy transition. That's our message. Let's talk about clean energy, why it's so important. There's specific policies within that we want to highlight: permitting reform, clean energy programs, tax credit implementation on the Republican side. But we want to tie those things back to why is it so important that we're investing right now in clean energy? Why is it so important that we're transitioning over to clean energy and including that in our energy mix? And with that, I think I think I'm ready to turn it over to Mindy.
Thank you, Jen. As Ellie gets ready with looking at what are our most upvoted questions, I just wanted to mention a few more opportunities for training that I will put in the chat. There's a key page that has links to all of these, and that's our Preparing for Summer Conference and Lobby Day. And I will add to that tomorrow some of these topic-specific ones, like the foreign pollution fee and Fix Our Forests and our permitting reform pages. I'll add those tomorrow, so you'll also be able to find them there. But we also have the additional training that we've added right on this same line on Monday, so that you can ask more of the questions that we might not get to tonight. And also for any that are new to lobbying with CCL, the Climate Advocate Workshop is the one thing that we require to lobby. And there is an advanced online version of this that will give you a little more of the experiential time. That's this Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, if you'd like to join that to have a full practice of a mock lobby meeting. We will also offer a shortened version at the conference on Monday, the 21st. And then we also have a new lobby meeting toolkit. That link is also in the chat. That can be a very helpful way to help you get lined up on what are all the things that you can be doing to prepare for your lobby meeting.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration.
Like what you hear? Recommend us to your friends and make sure to give us a 5-star rating. It helps us show up on other listeners' feeds. Feel free to pass on any suggestions for future episodes in the comments as well.
And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.